There was a time before time, a stillness before the first word was ever spoken. No eye existed to witness the darkness, no ear to hear the silence. And somewhere inside that absolute nothing, someone decided the void had gone on long enough. A garden would open and close in a single day. One brother would raise his hand against another. A man would build a ship under a sky that had never once produced rain. A tower would try to reach heaven, and heaven would answer back. A father would climb a mountain, carrying his own son and a knife. A young man would be thrown into a pit by the very people who shared his blood, and that pit, though no one could see it yet, would become the first step toward a throne. This isn't only the story of how the world began. It's the story of how everything God loved began to break, and how, again and again, He refused to let it go. This is Genesis, and this is only the beginning. Welcome to the Same Old Bible. Before we start, I want to ask you something simple. Stay until the end. Not because I'm telling you to, but because this story only makes sense once you've seen the whole shape of it. Now let's go back to where everything started. Before continents, before stars, before there was even a place for anything to exist, there was nothing but emptiness. A wet, dark emptiness with no edges and no center. Ancient tradition describes it as water without light, a depth with no bottom and no surface. And over that depth, something was moving. Not wind, not weather, a presence, the breath of God itself, hovering over nothing, the way an artist hovers over a blank canvas before the first stroke ever lands. Then came the shortest, most powerful command ever spoken. Let there be light. And light existed, not as some chaotic explosion, but as a decision. Darkness, which until that instant had been the entirety of everything, suddenly had a border. God didn't destroy it. He divided it. Half He called day, half He called night. And in that single act of dividing, something is born that will echo through the rest of this story. Order comes out of chaos, but chaos never fully disappears. It only gets contained. The days that followed were a kind of unfolding architecture, a sky to separate the waters above from the waters below, land rising out of the ocean as if taking its first breath, seeds that somehow already knew, without being taught, how to become trees, a sun to govern the day, a moon to keep watch over the night, and thousands of distant points of light whose purpose, the text tells us, wasn't only to shine, but to mark time itself. Seasons, days, years. God didn't just create space. He built the calendar inside which this entire story was about to unfold. Then came the creatures of the water and the sky, and after them the creatures of the ground, enormous and tiny alike, each according to its kind. Each one finding its place in a world that had only just begun to breathe. But something was still missing, and it wasn't another animal. God paused, if it's even possible to imagine God pausing, and said something He hadn't said before, not "let there be," but "let us make." A deliberate decision, almost intimate. Let us make someone in our image. And out of dust, out of the plainest, most unremarkable material imaginable, God shaped a human form. He didn't leave it there, lifeless. He bent down, tradition imagines, and breathed into its nostrils. Not just any breath, the breath of life. And the dust stopped being dust. Eyes opened for the first time. Lungs filled for the first time. That first man was named Adam, a name tied to the very ground he was formed from. And so he wouldn't be alone among all the creatures that already had a mate. God caused a deep sleep to fall over him, took part of his side, and shaped it into a woman. When Adam woke and saw her, He didn't reach for the name of another animal. He said, "This one, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh." He placed them in a garden called Eden, a place built, according to the account, so that abundance was the rule rather than the exception. Rivers ran through it. Trees carried fruit in every season, and at its center stood two trees unlike any of the others, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Everything was perfect, and precisely because of that, everything was about to change. God had given exactly one instruction, one single boundary inside all that abundance. Don't eat from that tree, the one holding the knowledge of good and evil. The day they did, death, a concept that up to that point had no reference point anywhere in existence, would enter the human story. And somewhere in the garden, something was watching. The account describes it as a serpent, more cunning than any other creature in the field. It didn't attack with force, it attacked with a question, which is always more dangerous than a threat. Did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? The woman corrected the exaggeration almost by reflex. We can eat from all of them except the one in the middle, or we'll die. And that's when the serpent delivered the oldest, most effective lie in human history. You won't die. God knows that the moment you eat from it, your eyes will open and you'll be like Him, knowing good and evil. It wasn't a clumsy lie. It was a surgical one, engineered to plant doubt about God's character itself. What if He isn't protecting you? What if that boundary was never love, but control? The woman looked at the fruit differently now. She no longer saw food. She saw desire. She saw wisdom. She saw the possibility of becoming more than she already was, and she ate. She gave some to the man beside her, and he ate too, with no one forcing his hand. In that instant, something tore. Not lightning, not an earthquake. Something far more personal and far more devastating. For the first time, they saw themselves and felt shame. They sewed leaves together to cover themselves, and when they heard God's presence moving through the garden, they did something they had never done before. They hid from Him. God called out to them, and that question, "Where are you?" isn't the question of someone who doesn't already know the answer. It's the question of a father who already suspects the worst and still gives his child the chance to walk out of hiding on his own. Adam blamed the woman blamed the serpent. And so, on the very first day of human history outside of innocence, something else was born too. Something that would follow humanity forever. The habit of pointing somewhere else before looking at oneself. Judgment came, and with it, history's first closed door. The garden was sealed, guarded by beings of fire, no longer reachable. Adam and his wife, now named Eve, mother of all the living, were sent out into a land that would no longer give fruit without effort, without sweat, without pain. But even inside the sentence, there's a crack of light most people skip right past. God speaks to the serpent and promises that somewhere down the line, a descendant of the woman would crush its head, even while suffering a wound in the process. It's the very first promise in the Bible. It's wrapped inside a curse, but it's still a promise. Punishment was never the final word. It never is. Outside the garden, life went on, though nothing worked quite the same anymore. Eve gave birth to a first son, Cain, and later another Abel. Cain worked the soil. Abel kept flocks, 2 occupations, 2 temperaments, and one single day when both of them decided to bring an offering to God. Cain brought from the harvest of the ground. Abel brought the best of his flock, the firstborn, the healthiest animals he had. The text doesn't spell out in technical detail why one offering was accepted and the other wasn't. What it makes unmistakably clear is Cain's reaction. And that reaction is really the point. There was no sadness. There was rage. His face fell, and then something remarkable happens. God doesn't punish Cain for being angry. He talks to him, almost like a father who sees danger coming before his son does. If you do what's right, won't you be accepted? But if you don't, sin is crouching at the door like a predator waiting for the right moment, and it wants you. Still, you can master it. It's one of the clearest warnings in the entire book. Temptation doesn't appear out of nowhere. It crouches, it waits, and the choice to resist it or feed it always belongs to the person who hears it. Cain didn't master it. He fed it. He invited his brother out to the field, and there, away from any witnesses, envy became the first human blood ever spilled by another human hand. God asks, again, a question he already knows the answer to. Where is your brother? And Cain's response has echoed for centuries as one of the most quoted, most uncomfortable lines in all of Scripture. Am I my brother's keeper? The ground itself, the account says, had received Abel's blood, and that blood was crying out. Cain was condemned to wander, exiled, marked, not for destruction, but, strangely enough, for protection. A sign meant to keep anyone who found him from killing him. Even in the harshest judgment the book has delivered so far, there's a gesture of mercy that doesn't erase the guilt, but doesn't abandon the guilty either. Before we keep going, if this story has been pulling you in the way it pulled me in while writing it, now's a good moment to hit subscribe. Because what's coming next, an entire world about to be wiped out by water, is even more intense. Generations multiplied after Cain and after Seth. The son God gave Adam and Eve as a kind of replacement for Abel. But with every generation, something kept corroding in humanity's collective heart. The text sums it up with a devastating line. Every inclination of the human heart was only evil all the time. We're not talking about occasionally bad people. We're talking about an entire civilization that had turned violence and corruption into its everyday language. And then something happens that rarely gets the weight it deserves. God, faced with that reality, feels pain, not cold, calculated anger, grief, the kind felt by someone watching something they built with love fall apart. The decision was devastating, a flood that would wipe away what had become corrupted to make room for something new to begin. But even in the harshest sentence the book had delivered up to that point, God carved out an exception, one man who walked differently than everyone around him, a man named Noah. Noah received extraordinarily specific instructions. Build a massive vessel, sealed inside and out, engineered to survive something humanity had never once witnessed, because, according to the account, it had never rained on the earth that way before. Picture it, an older man spending decades building a structure that made no visible sense under a clear sky, while his neighbors, generation after generation, mocked him for it. There was no precedent, no visible urgency, only the word of God and the stubborn obedience of a man willing to look ridiculous for believing it. When the ark was finished, the animals arrived. The text insists on the word arrived, not were forced in, as if something inside the natural order itself already knew it was time to seek shelter. And then, in a silence that must have felt unbearable, the door closed. Noah didn't close it. God did. Then came the rain. 40 days and 40 nights, the account says, though the flood itself, the water covering the earth, lasted much longer than that. The known world disappeared underwater, and inside that wooden box floating over the wreckage, a small handful of living creatures carried the entire future. When the waters finally began to recede, Noah first sent out a raven, which flew back and forth without ever finding a place to land, and then a dove. The dove came back empty the first few times, but on a later attempt, it returned carrying an olive leaf in its beak, the first sign of plant life after the catastrophe, the first proof that somewhere, something had started growing again. Once the ground was finally dry, God established something new, a covenant not just with Noah, but with all of creation going forward, sealed by a visible sign in the sky whenever clouds gathered with rain, a bow of color, a promise that total destruction by water would never happen again. And yet, and this matters, human nature didn't change because of the flood. The heart that walked off that ark was the same heart that had walked onto it. Water had purified the earth, but it hadn't, on its own, purified the people living on it. That's one of the most uncomfortable truths in all of Genesis. No external punishment, no matter how severe, can substitute for a change that has to happen from the inside. And proof of that was coming fast. Over time, Noah's descendants multiplied and settled on a fertile plain, all speaking one language, all sharing one purpose. And that purpose, harmless on the surface, hid something deeper. Build a city, and at its center, a tower reaching toward heaven, so that, in the words of the account itself, they could make a name for themselves and avoid being scattered across the earth. Stop on that phrase for a second. Make a name for themselves. This isn't just ambitious architecture, it's the same impulse that had already shown up back in the garden. The desire to become equal to God, to build your own significance without needing Him for it. God looks at the tower. The text almost sounds ironic here. He came down to see what these men, so full of pride, believed would reach the heavens, and makes a decision that stops the entire project without laying a single hand on the structure itself. He confuses their language. Suddenly, the same workers who had understood each other perfectly can no longer coordinate a single instruction. Chaos, not force, is what dissolves the ambition. Humanity scattered across the earth, split into languages and peoples, and that place carried a name that is itself a play on the word confusion, Babel. It's one of the shortest stories in the book, but it carries one of its most consistent warnings. Every time humanity tries to build its own greatness with no room left for God, that structure ends up collapsing from the inside. In the middle of that scattered humanity, in a region called there lived a man named Abram, childless, married to a woman named Sarai, who couldn't conceive. He wasn't young. He wasn't especially remarkable. He hadn't done anything up to that point that would have earned him a place in history. And yet, God chose him. The instruction was radical. Leave your land, leave your family, leave your father's house, and go toward a place I haven't shown you yet. No coordinates, no map, just a promise. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless those who bless you, and through you, every family on earth will be blessed. Abram obeyed with no tangible guarantees, carrying nothing but a promise. And that obedience, walking toward the unknown on the strength of a promise alone, becomes, throughout the rest of the book, the standard against which every character who comes after him gets measured. Years passed, and the promise of a child still hadn't come true. Sarai, worn down by waiting, offered a practical solution common to her culture. Let Abram have a son through her servant Hagar. That's how Ishmael was born. But God had been specific. The promised son wouldn't come through a human shortcut. He would come from Sarai herself, even though her age by that point made the idea almost absurd. Then, when Abram was 99 years old, God spoke to him again, changed his name to Abraham, father of many nations, and changed Sarai's name to Sarah, and reaffirmed the promise. Within a year, against every biological expectation, she would have a son. When Sarah overheard the promise repeated by divine messengers, she laughed quietly to herself. It wasn't quite mockery. It was the disbelieving laugh of someone life had already taught not to expect too much. And yet the promise held. A son was born, and they named him Isaac, which means, fittingly, he laughs or laughter, a name that turned Sarah's disbelief into permanent celebration. But Abraham's story doesn't end with the birth of a miracle. Years later, it arrives at its harshest test. God asks him for something that defies every instinct a father has. Take your son, your only son, the one you love, and offer him as a sacrifice on a mountain I will show you. There's no explanation given beforehand, no comfort offered in advance. Just the command, and Abraham's decision to obey the very next morning early, without dragging out the pain with more sleepless nights than necessary. Father and son climbed together carrying wood, fire, and a knife. And Isaac, still unaware of the full plan, asks one of the most gut-wrenching questions in all of Scripture. Here's the fire and the wood, Father, but where is the lamb? Abraham answers with a faith that doesn't hold up to reason. God himself will provide the lamb, my son. It's a line that can be read two ways: as a desperate attempt to calm his son down, or as a genuine conviction that God wouldn't let the promise die on that mountain. Tradition leans toward the second reading, backed by a striking detail. Abraham apparently believed that, if necessary, God could bring life back even after death. He built the altar. He bound his son. He raised the knife. And in that exact instant, not a second before, not a second after, a voice stopped his hand. Don't harm the boy. Now I know you fear God, because you didn't withhold even your only son from me. A ram appeared, caught in some nearby brush, providentially available to take Isaac's place on the altar. Abraham named that place, in that very moment, the Lord will provide, a name that would stand forever as a reminder that extreme faith, the kind that holds on even when it doesn't understand, always finds, sooner or later, the provision it needs. This episode, so difficult to sit with on a first read, has come to be understood as something bigger than a test of blind obedience. It's a preview. A father willing to hand over his own beloved son on a mountain becomes, centuries later, the shadow of a far greater sacrifice, one that would, this time, be carried through to the end. Before we keep going, let me say this directly. If you've made it this far, you've already spent more than 20 minutes inside this story, which means it's holding your attention for something more than passing curiosity. Take a second to hit like right now. It genuinely helps this kind of content reach more people who need to hear it too. And now, let's keep going, because the story is about to get even more complicated inside this very family carrying the promise. Isaac grew up, married Rebekah, and for years faced the same struggle his father had faced: barrenness. When Rebekah finally conceived, she felt a struggle happening inside her own body, intense enough that she went looking for an answer directly from God. The answer was an unsettling prophecy. 2 separate nations would come from her, and the older would serve the younger, a complete reversal of the social order expected in that era, where the firstborn always led. Twins were born. The first, covered in reddish hair, was named Esau. The second came out gripping his brother's heel as if he'd already been competing for his brother's place since before he could see. They named him Jacob, a name that in Hebrew plays on the idea of deceiving or grasping. Esau grew into a hunter, a man of the open field, his father's favorite. Jacob preferred staying close to the tents, more calculating, more patient, his mother's favorite. And one day, that difference in temperament decided both their futures. Esau came in from the field exhausted and starving and found Jacob cooking a stew. He asked to eat, and Jacob, with a coldness that says a lot about his character, attached a condition. "Sell me your birthright first." Esau, driven in that moment purely by immediate hunger, agreed without weighing the long-term cost. He traded his inheritance, his future role as head of the family, carrier of the blessing and the promise, for a single bowl of food. Years later, when Isaac was old and blind, he decided it was time to formally bless Esau before he died. Rebekah, remembering the earlier prophecy, devised a deception. She dressed Jacob in animal skins to imitate his brother's hairy arms and sent him in to Isaac, disguised as Esau. The deception worked. Isaac, confused by touch and smell but convinced he was blessing his firstborn, gave Jacob a formal blessing, nearly irreversible by the customs of the time: prosperity, authority over his brothers, and the continuation of the covenant God had made with Abraham. When Esau discovered the deception, his reaction was a grief so raw it's still uncomfortable to read today. He begged, almost pleading, for a blessing of his own, and received only a lesser promise marked by hardship and distance from his brother. The resentment ran so deep that Esau privately decided to wait for his father's death before taking revenge. Rebekah, hearing of the plan, sent Jacob away toward the household of her own brother Laban in a distant land. Jacob had gotten the blessing he wanted, but getting it turned him into a fugitive from his own home. Fleeing, Jacob stopped for the night out in open country, using a stone for a pillow. And there, in the most complete solitude of his life up to that point, he had a dream that would reshape his entire understanding of God. A stairway connecting earth to heaven, divine messengers moving up and down it, and at the top, the presence of God himself, reaffirming the same promise he had made to Jacob's grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac. Jacob woke up and spoke a line that has echoed for centuries. "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't even know it." He continued on to Laban's household, where he met Rachel, and was so taken with her that he agreed to work 7 years for her hand in marriage. But Laban, shrewd and without scruples, deceived Jacob on his wedding night, substituting Rachel with her older sister, Leah. Jacob, who had once deceived his own father to steal a blessing, was now experiencing firsthand what it felt like to be deceived. The irony doesn't go unnoticed in the account. The very currency Jacob had once paid with was now being paid back to him. He had to work 7 more years to finally marry Rachel as well. 14 years of his life spent in that waiting, in that double deception, in that painful lesson that consequences don't vanish just because you eventually get what you wanted. Years later, on his way back to his homeland and toward the inevitable reunion with the brother he had betrayed, Jacob spent one night completely alone, and a stranger appeared to him in the darkness, starting a physical struggle that lasted until dawn. Neither one could overthrow the other until, as day broke, the stranger touched Jacob's hip and dislocated it with a single motion, making it clear the fight had never been a fair one to begin with. He had simply been allowing it. Jacob, even wounded, refused to let go. "I won't let you go unless you bless me." And that's when the decisive change came. "You will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you have wrestled with God and with men, and you have prevailed." The name Israel, which can be translated as "he wrestles with God" or "God wrestles," would become, from that moment forward, the identity of an entire future nation. Jacob walked away from that night limping, but also transformed. And the next day he reunited with Esau, who, against everything Jacob feared, ran to embrace him instead of attacking him. Years of resentment dissolved into an unexpected embrace, a reminder that even the deepest family wounds aren't necessarily condemned to stay open forever. Of the 12 sons Jacob had over the course of his life, one would go on to become the central figure of the final stretch of Genesis. Joseph, the favored son, born to Rachel, the wife Jacob loved most. Jacob made no effort to hide his preference, going as far as gifting Joseph an elaborate robe, a visible mark of distinction his brothers couldn't interpret as anything other than a constant insult. The favoritism deepened when Joseph began having dreams that, with an audacity almost reckless for his age, he decided to share with his family. Dreams where sheaves of wheat belonging to his brothers bowed down to his own, where the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him. His brothers didn't need much help decoding the message, and the resentment they already carried turned into something far more dangerous. One day, while Joseph went looking for his brothers out in the field on his father's orders, they spotted him approaching from a distance and decided to act. The initial plan was to kill him outright, but one brother, Reuben, stepped in with an alternative, secretly hoping to rescue him later, throw him into an empty cistern instead of killing him directly. While Reuben was temporarily away, another brother, Judah, proposed something even more pragmatic and cruel. Instead of leaving him to die in the pit, why not profit from it by selling him to a caravan of traders passing by on their way to Egypt? The plan was accepted, and for the price of an ordinary slave, Joseph vanished from his family's life, while his brothers stained his robe with animal blood to hand Jacob a devastating lie. A wild animal had torn him apart. Jacob's grief on hearing that news was so total that he refused every attempt at comfort. No one in that family knew in that moment that the story was nowhere near finished. Joseph arrived in Egypt as the property of Potiphar, a high-ranking official in Pharaoh's court. And despite his status as a slave, something in his character quickly stood out. Diligence, integrity, and unusual ability to make anything he touched succeed. Potiphar eventually put him in charge of running his entire household. But that rise came to an abrupt stop when Potiphar's wife, drawn to Joseph, tried repeatedly to seduce him. Joseph refused, citing not just loyalty to his master, but something deeper. He couldn't commit such evil against God himself. Frustrated by the constant rejection, she falsely accused him of assault, using as evidence a piece of clothing Joseph had left behind while fleeing the room. Potiphar, without looking any further into the accusation, had Joseph thrown in prison. Once again, integrity hadn't protected him from unjust consequences, and once again, Joseph found himself stripped of everything, first his freedom, now his reputation. And yet, even in prison, that same character kept surfacing. The warden eventually put him in charge of other prisoners, and it was there that Joseph developed, or perhaps revealed for the first time, a rare gift, the ability to interpret dreams with startling accuracy. He correctly interpreted the dreams of two royal officials imprisoned alongside him. One would be restored to his position within 3 days. The other would be executed in that same span. And both predictions came true exactly as Joseph had said. He asked the official who would be freed to remember him and put in a word with Pharaoh once restored. But the official, back in his old life and free again, simply forgot. Joseph stayed in prison 2 more years, a stretch the account doesn't dwell on, but which almost certainly represents one of the longest, quietest tests of his entire story. The point where hope has to hold on with no external sign that anything is about to change. The turn finally came when Pharaoh himself had a dream none of his advisors or magicians could interpret. 7 healthy cows, devoured by 7 starving ones. 7 full heads of grain, devoured by 7 withered ones. That's when the forgetful official, hearing Pharaoh's desperation, finally remembered Joseph. Pulled hastily from prison, Joseph stood before the most powerful ruler in the region and, taking no credit for himself, explained that the interpretation would come from God, not from him. 7 years of extraordinary abundance, followed by 7 years of devastating famine, and an urgent need for a storage strategy to survive the crisis. Pharaoh, impressed not just by the interpretation, but by the strategic clarity of Joseph's proposed solution, made a radical decision. He placed a former slave, a former prisoner, as second in command over all of Egypt. The years of abundance came and went exactly as Joseph had predicted, and thanks to his management, Egypt entered the years of famine with reserves large enough to survive, while the surrounding regions, including the land where Joseph's family still lived, suffered severe shortages. Jacob, hearing that grain was available in Egypt, sent his sons to buy provisions, keeping only the youngest, Benjamin, back home, afraid of losing him too. The brothers appeared before the Egyptian governor with no idea whatsoever that they were, quite literally, bowing before the very brother they had sold years earlier. Joseph recognized them instantly. They had no chance of recognizing him. 2 decades had completely transformed the boy in the special robe into a man holding absolute authority over the most powerful nation in the region. What follows is one of the most emotionally layered sequences in the entire book. Instead of revealing himself right away, Joseph decides to test his brothers, demanding they bring Benjamin on a later trip, and later orchestrating a situation, planting a valuable cup among Benjamin's belongings, specifically designed to see whether his brothers this time would be willing to abandon another younger brother to his fate, the same way they had once abandoned him. The answer came through Judah, the very same brother who had once proposed selling him, who offered to become a slave in Benjamin's place rather than break their father's heart a second time. It was in witnessing that genuine change of heart, not just words, that Joseph could no longer hold the disguise together. He ordered everyone else out of the room, and alone with his brothers, he broke down. "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold." The silence that followed, according to the account, was so complete you could almost hear the brothers' fear at the possibility of well-deserved revenge. But instead of punishment, Joseph offered one of the deepest insights in all of Genesis about suffering and purpose. "You intended to harm me, but God turned it into good, to preserve the lives of many people. You didn't send me here, God did, and He did it before any of you." It's not a line that minimizes the betrayal. It's a line brave enough to look the pain straight on and still insist that not even the worst human decision falls outside the reach of a larger purpose. Jacob, hearing that the son he had mourned as dead was alive after all, traveled to Egypt with his entire household, and the reunion between father and son closed after decades, a wound that had seemed impossible to heal. They settled in Egypt, where the family grew and multiplied, laying, without knowing it yet, the foundation for what would eventually become an entire nation. Genesis ends with Jacob, now elderly, blessing each of his 12 sons before he dies, and with Joseph, also aged by now, asking his family for one final promise. When God eventually brings them back to the land promised to Abraham, they should carry his bones with them. A small gesture on the surface, but heavy with meaning. Even surrounded by the comfort and power of Egypt, Joseph never stopped remembering that it wasn't in the end his true home. And that's where the book stops, even though the story clearly doesn't. What began with a perfect garden and a single boundary ended generations later with an entire family reunited in a foreign land, alive because of a man his own brothers had once sold. Along the way, a fall, a murder, a flood, a fallen tower, an impossible promise, a mountain with a knife stopped midair, a twin stolen blessing, a night-long struggle, and a forgiveness no one saw coming. If there's one thread running through every single one of these stories from beginning to end, it's this: God never stopped being present, even when human beings again and again chose to act as if they were completely on their own. This is only the first door in a much larger story. Behind it waits an enslaved nation, a river of blood turned into a symbol of freedom, and a man raised inside a palace who would one day have to stand against the most powerful empire of his time to set his people free. If this story made you feel something, curiosity, awe, maybe even discomfort at some of these very human, very ancient decisions, that's exactly the reaction I'm chasing every time I sit down to write one of these. Subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment telling me which biblical story you'd want told with this same depth. And if you want to keep going right where this one leaves off, the story continues with slavery in Egypt and the birth of Israel's deliverer. See you in the next one.